Okay, on behalf of your Popcorn and Politics co-host, Shawnee, Lenexa, and Overland Park Chamber of Commerce, we welcome you back to the Forum for House District 17. I'm Phil Hammond, co-chair of the Shawnee Chamber of Government Affairs, and it's my honor to serve as the moderator. For those who have not attended earlier forum, our forum today includes 3 minutes opening statements. There will be questions, and the answers will be 1.5 minutes to respond, and then we will end with a 2-minute closing statement from each person. Speaking order has been selected randomly, and it will rotate through the program, and hopefully I will keep that on pace. Again, thanks to taking time to be here. If you have your cell phones out, please mute them so they don't interrupt our presentation here. I'd like to introduce our candidates to you first. The first candidate, Tom Cox, represented an incumbent candidate, was first elected to represent District 17 in 2016. He graduated from KU, where he was active in student government and the Dole Institute of Politics. Originally a marketing professional, he now runs his own consulting firm, helps smaller businesses find operational and cost efficiencies. He lives in Shawnee. Our second person is Michael Kerner, Libertarian candidate, is originally from Brooklyn, New York. He is retired from Honeywell International after 49 years as an engineer. He serves on the executive committee of the Libertarian Party of Kansas and is active in a number of other civic organizations. He resides in Lenexa. Laura Smith Everett, Democratic candidate, is a KU graduate. She has been an educator for 15 years, holding a variety of roles and titles through her career. She is currently a district instructional coach, providing training and support to elementary school teachers. She and her husband live with their 3 children in Shawnee. So we now go into the 3-minute opening statements, and leading this off will be Laura.
I'm going to apologize. I'm fighting a cold and laryngitis is trying to take over. So if you'll bear with me, I'll try to speak as loudly as I can. I'm a mom of 3, as was mentioned in my introduction. 2 of our children go to the great Shawnee Mission schools. One of our children receives special needs services at a great institution here in the area, the Leanne Britton Center. I have been an educator for 15 years, and in the last 8 or so, I've been an instructional coach where I work between groups that sometimes are at odds with each other, like teachers and administrators or students and teachers, and I work between those groups, always keeping the objectives of providing a great education in mind. Those are skills that are really needed in the State House, between different groups, always keeping in mind what's best for Kansas citizens. And I look forward to bringing them. Thank you all so much for hosting this. Thanks to my other candidate pals. We've been together a lot this week. It's really important that all of us are able to come and you can make educated choices for your vote in November. Thank you.
Okay. Tom?
My name is Tom Cox. I have the honor of being the current incumbent here in District 17. We are in District 17, on the border of it. I ran in 2016 because I got absolutely frustrated with what was going on in our state. We had irresponsible tax policy, irresponsible spending for the fact that you didn't have the revenue to fund what you wanted to spend, and we defunded education effectively. And it kind of reached to a boiling point. I never thought, oh, I'm going to run for office, but it just got to the point where we couldn't find someone else to run, and it was the last option. And I've really enjoyed serving the last 2 years. It's really fun getting to represent this community because I'm born and raised in it. My entire immediate family are constituents. Myself, my 2 brothers, when we decided to buy homes, we bought within a mile of our parents. We actually are all in the same elementary school district we went to, and now my sister-in-law is actually the music teacher there, which makes it a lot more fun. This is my forever home. It's the home I was raised in, and the home I will live in, and hopefully the home I will someday die in the very far future. But it's an honor to represent it up in Topeka, to fight for the community, I've had the privilege of serving on the Energy, Utility, and Telecom Committee, the Insurance Committee, local government, which has given me the opportunity to work a lot with the cities of Lenexa, Shawnee, and additionally outside the district with Overland Park, Olathe, being one of the Johnson County advocates for local government. Additionally, I serve on Administrative Rules and Regulations, which is an interim committee. It is both the most interesting and boring committee you can be on, because you talk about things that are so minute, like, hey, we're going to ban this really specific type of fish from being used as bait. But the flip side is, now I know about why they don't let marbled carp into the state as bait. So you learn a lot of really fun things too. But I've really enjoyed the experience, and I'm looking forward to answering questions for you guys today, and hopefully having the opportunity to serve this community again.
Okay. Michael?
Okay, my name is Michael Kerner. I wasn't born here. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but I've lived in Kansas for 20 years now. I worked for the same company for 49 years in 3 states. Ended up here. Followed the job around for 3 states. 3 children, 4 grandchildren. The oldest of which is 7, and he's a 2nd grader in an elementary school here in Shawnee Mission. This is probably your first exposure to libertarianism. We are not Democrats and not Republicans and not halfway in between. We actually have our own set of principles, the most important of which is the non-aggression principle. So we look at everything from, am I stealing from somebody by doing this? Am I hurting somebody who didn't hurt me by doing this? That's how I decide what's right and what's wrong. All right? Of course, the media tends to keep us a secret. There's 5 candidates for governor, but the media has you convinced there's only 3. And there is a libertarian candidate among those secret candidates, and I have some literature for Jeff Caldwell outside of the table. Okay, now we offer some common sense solutions. Like, there's actually been prison riots in the state because of overcrowding. And it's such an obvious solution. Why are we putting people in jail for possession of marijuana? If we made that legal, 20% of those prisoners could go home. Bingo, overcrowding solved. Besides, they'd be out working for a living again instead of being on our tab for eating and supporting, and their families being without possibly a breadwinner. They get to go home and work and pay taxes like normal people. And we're doing this because marijuana, which is as harmless as anything ever is we've made illegal for no particular reason. There's families now who have moved out of the state because they needed to get marijuana to keep their kids from having daily seizures. I know a couple of them. They had to go to college. They moved to Colorado, and they've been successful. It works. Kids who've got multiple seizures a day and have now been seizure-free for months. The other thing is the war on drugs brings us a civil forfeiture, where the state just kind of steals money randomly from people. Oh, I think you have drugs. Oh, you don't have drugs. We made a mistake. Well, we'll keep your car. Well, we'll keep your money, or whatever it was, and that goes on regularly, and that has to end. So I'm down to my last minute, so I think that's enough now.
Okay, thank you. We're now going into the question and answering period, in which they'll have a minute and a half to respond. And since there's 3 of us, I'm going to read the question one time, and then we'll go through the 3 answers to it. If you need the question stated again when it's your turn, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to do that. So question number 1 to our candidates are, what are your views on state tax policy? And Tom, you're the first one.
Yeah, I think we are finally in a healthy, sustainable spot with tax policy. We made the really hard decision to undo a lot of the Brownback tax experiment in 2017. We did not go back to the full top tier rates that would have put us as one of the highest in the regions. We found a middle ground for income taxes that were reasonable, that put us competitive below Missouri, below Nebraska, below Arkansas, Iowa, but still a little bit above Colorado, Oklahoma, who have other significant revenue sources to offset for themselves. And we put LLCs, S-corps, and sole proprietors back on the roll in a fair way. This has generated the revenue to appropriately fund our government. The last 2 years, we have produced budgets that did not run into the red, which is the first time they've done in years. We did not have to borrow to cover the budgets additionally, and we're generating a surplus. That being said, there are 2 major issues I think we need to tackle. Food sales tax, 2nd highest in the nation, and that's unacceptable, especially when it is so low across the border in Missouri, so in Nebraska as well. So we need to tackle that, find ways, whether it's using some of the excess revenue to offset, or we can do offsetting measures like legalizing sports betting, implementing fair policies on sales tax now that the US Supreme Court has said you can do that. So it can be something that is, we can reduce it there, but it's being made up on a different end to be revenue neutral. Additionally, I think we need to decouple from the federal standards on itemization. That was something with that change with the standard deduction doubling. A lot of middle class and lower income Kansans will no longer be able to itemize their state income taxes, which does away with the point of us restoring all of those itemizations for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Okay, libertarians don't like taxes, and we never did because of it. I do have some ideas about the school funding issue, and there's some later questions about it, but I'll start right now. I don't think there's any way to say what is full funding. I don't know how to say education is fully funded. I don't know how the court could ever say that. I know the school boards will never say they have enough. I know the courts seem to say usually they always want a little bit more. And I don't know where the end is. So I'm suggesting that we remove the state's obligation to fund schools and push it back to the school boards, which is, by the way, the way it was in Florida when I lived there. No state income tax, school boards raised their own taxes and ran their own schools. And one school district did not have to support another school district. But I see my time is about up, so.
Yeah, thank you. And Laura?
So I would answer with, I think that it's definitely better, healthier, but not perfect. I think that there are some things we need to address, especially for families who have very limited income, including drastically reducing our regressive consumption tax and grocery tax, which is the second highest in the nation. But I think the other thing we need to take a look at is how we are giving tax incentives and abolishing taxes for corporations. There has been a lot of, there's been a lot in Kansas about the inability to track what tax incentives we're giving to large corporations. So we get them here, but we're not actually able to use their tax revenue from companies because we are giving tax deals, and Kansas aren't really sure what those are because we don't have a transparent system to provide that. Missouri, for example, has a website where you can go and find out which corporations were given what kind of tax breaks. So I think we need to really start to look at the component of taking the burden off of hardworking Kansans and begin to make sure that corporations are paying their fair share.
Thank you. We go on to the second question, which is, with record low unemployment rates challenging businesses' ability to find enough employees, what would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce? And Michael, you're first.
Okay, we have two problems, a long-term and a short-term one. Short-term, since most of what we need is skilled labor, that's hard, that takes time to train. We have a short-term problem, attracting them from another state. Lower taxes is about the only thing you can do for that. You have to make it, this is a better place for them to live, have a better standard of living by coming here, because you're pulling them away from somewhere else. Long-term, yes, education. That's the skills education. This is not a K-12. This is a vocational school. I guess we have to get rid of this concept that everybody has to go to college. That's right for some people, but that's not right for everybody. And vocational training is quite important. And community colleges are probably the best place to do that. So I would support that process.
Okay, thank you. And Laura, you're next.
So I think that, a line that a constituent in District 17 told me that I've been using is Kansas doesn't have mountains or oceans, but we have great public schools, which is what attracts people to Kansas. And with them comes their families, and they stay. And I think it's a really important thing that Kansas funds its public schools. It gets out of the court system so that we look like we're still that great place to come and raise a family. And that attracts employment to the area. I think one of the other things is we need to be really clear that pro-immigrant and anti-discriminatory policies are important for attracting workers. Implementing anti-discriminatory policies like the one that was passed this last year, the LGBT adoption, sends a message that Kansas is a discriminatory place. And businesses get very cold feet about coming to discriminatory places or places that are dipping, states that are dipping into controversy. I think we also need to really look at, there are some successful places in western Kansas where pro-immigrant policies are creating thriving communities and attracting more people to do important work. And those at the state level are going to help all counties attract employment.
Thank you. Okay, Tom, you're next.
Yeah, I have to agree that I think the number one thing we can do is provide for education. You know, different states have different incentive mechanisms that come into them, but what has driven Kansas, specifically Johnson County, which is the fifth largest, or has a fifth of the state's population, about 40% of the tax revenue base of the entire state, is schools. I mean, we all know people that at one point lived on the Missouri side and were either getting ready to have kids or had kids, and they moved over here because they wanted to be in the school system. That is first and foremost what we need to do. It's why my parents moved here from Topeka. My dad was originally from this area. But they said when they were about to have me and had my older brother and he was starting school, so they're like, okay, we want to go and be in the Shawnee Mission School District. So that is first and foremost, and we've been putting schools back on a healthy funding track. Additionally, we do have to look at different economic development incentives. I had the fortune of working for 6 years for a large commercial real estate portfolio. When we started there, it was around $200 million. By the time I left to take this job, it was about $1 billion. We never once looked at what the state's taxes were. We didn't care about income tax, that never mattered to us. What we looked at was how were our local governments that we're going to be working with zoning, how friendly are they to our businesses? We looked at what property taxes were and other economic development incentives they are willing to do to work with us. So we need to focus back on that local level of driving economic development. So it's good schools and good local policy.
Thank you. We move on to question 3, and that is Topeka as a whole appears poised to reinforce or to refocus on the state's infrastructure. What would your priorities be in any new statewide transportation plan? And Laura, you're first.
Okay. I think the first thing is to attach the funding, well, first of all, repay what we've taken and borrowed and stolen, frankly, from KDOT, so that they can do the work that has been stalled for the last several years. Secondly, I think it's really important that we fund projects and make sure that we have a funding mechanism for the duration of the project. One of the things that's happened in KDOT is we have had statewide transportation plans, but because there's not a funding mechanism, they, part of the way through, have been unable to be completed. And the way that we've kind of gone up and down with our politics, I think is important that the transportation department knows that it has reliable funding, and that when we set forth a statewide transportation plan, there are projects that have the ability to see it all the way through.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to support the new transportation task force that we created, that we are in the end of T-Works. We have 2 years left, and they're working on the next T-Works 2020. So they're already driving what these ideals were. Additionally, when I ran, one of the things I ran on aside from schools was that we need to promote returning the money for infrastructure projects. They've canceled over 23 projects in T-Works. As of last year's budget, we've allocated funds that put all 23 plus projects back in motion. So they are starting right back up again. So though we can't restore all the money that was cut long ago, we've put the money back in to get those projects going. So that's really exciting. Looking into the future, or I do want to add, I've been supported by the Kansas Contractors Association again in this race for my work on transportation, and I'm very fortunate to have their support. Because the money we invest into infrastructure comes right back into our economy. It's local jobs, it's local spending, it's local companies they use for a lot of the materials. It is one of the best ways to cycle government spending right back into actual economic growth, while doing it, privatizing it, because it's private companies. Additionally, I think we need to continue to look at what our rural projects are needed. Not a lot of people may live out there, but that is where a massive amount of our trucking and shipping runs through, so we need to maintain that they have good roads. Around here, I think one of our top priorities should be 69 Highway and expansion of that highway to ensure that we can handle economic growth and we don't put our citizens in a position where they're going to get unsafe or having potentially fatal traffic accidents because there's too much traffic and not enough highway to handle it.
Thank you. And Michael?
Okay, we don't like taxes, but we don't mind user fees, and gasoline taxes and tolls are user fees. And that's a direct payment by the people who actually use the roads. So that's perfectly fair. The problem is the government tends to steal it, right? they steal it and use it for other things. So that, we have to set up an absolute firm trust fund situation where that money cannot be used for anything else but road maintenance and road building. I think that's probably all we really have to do to solve the problem. We just spoke, that means we have to keep the government honest.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to question 4, and that question is, what are your views on funding K through 12 education? And Tom, you're up first.
Yeah, I don't think I've mentioned it before, but I support our public schools. There's really not many people in the state, in the legislature, that don't support public schools. There's a lot of different people who have different views on how you support it, but it is the lifeblood of our community. I know you can change the exact same house in a different elementary school district, and it's a different price because of that. It is what drives our economy at a state level, but also very heavily at a local level. We have passed through a plan that will put in about $850 million in new K through 12 spending. It's a 5-year phase-in. I was very happy to support that. And it's not enough. We still need to put a little bit more in there. The court said it's adequate if you account for inflation over the 5-year plan, which I'm committed to doing. I've been very fortunate. I appreciate the support from the Kansas Teachers Association, KNEA, being endorsed by them solo for my work on education, along with Game On Kansas, which is the largest parent-run advocacy group on K through 12 education in the state. And so I look forward to going back up there and to continuing to work to solve the problem, to make sure we are adequately funding, working with our court system instead of working against it to try to solve the problem, working on a bipartisan nature, because this is not a problem a party can solve. This is a problem that the state needs to solve.
Thank you. And Michael?
Okay, I spoke a little bit about this before, but I'll continue with what I was saying. The fact that as I said, I'd like to have every school district raise its own money and run its own schools as it sees fit, because I believe it's improper to force one school district to send money to another school district to get equalization. That's nothing short of stealing in my mind. The other thing is, I do think we need to have a more, get closer to a competitive market. We should have some sort of mechanism for people to take their kids and their money and send them to private school. That's usually, and the shorthand for that is vouchers. So I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism would be, but we need some competition for the school districts to get better quality and to keep the cost down.
Thank you. And Laura?
Can you read the question?
Question is, what are your views on funding K-12 education?
In 1966, Kansans felt so strongly about Kansas public schools being supported that we put in a suitability clause into our Constitution. And it's something that we've abided by for all these years and shouldn't be controversial. It's our obligation. It takes care of our future and makes sure that we don't have any question about Kansas being a great, vibrant place to live and work, and we need to continue funding it. At the last end of the session, I was watching very closely, and there was the opportunity to tie this funding up with a bow and be done with it. And the thing that I hear at the doors over and over and over is people are really wanting Kansas public schools funded, and they're tired of being in the news about it and going back to court. There's a real sense of exhaustion over this topic. And I think that it is really disappointing that our legislature couldn't tie that up. We had enough money at the end of the legislative session. We could have tied it to inflation and we could be done. And yet here we are again, and we'll be spending part of this next session eating away time that could be used for other important topics to address the school funding. Lastly, I just want to say I had the opportunity to go to the Shawnee Mission breakfast this morning. And I should say, we'll talk about it at another time. See me afterwards.
Okay. Question 5. Describe what you see as the Kansas advantage when it comes to economic development and tourism, and the type of economic development policies you would support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas. And Michael, you're up first.
Okay, and you know the answer I'm going to give you. The way to get businesses to come and investment to come and people to come is lower taxes. And you can do whatever you have to do to make that happen. You cut your spending, and you make it a good place to live, that way people can have a good standard of living. Because in the end, it's not the number of dollars you get in your paycheck at the top line, it's the number of dollars you have at the bottom line that counts, because that's what determines your standard of living. So getting taxes lower is how you attract people, especially when you want high-skilled people coming from, that might be coming from far away.
Okay, thank you. Laura?
I'm going to disagree with Michael. I know that'll be a surprise on this, but there's so much more to life than taxes, and there's so much more that drives economic development than just taxes alone. I think, as I mentioned earlier, it is really important for us to be as transparent as possible with taxpayers about the tax incentives we use in the state of Kansas. Kansas City Star covered it in their series on transparency issues in Kansas, and I think it's a really critical step so that we have the trust of the Kansas taxpayers that we are using their tax money responsibly. But after that, I think one of the things as I have used as an instructional coach in my role is data-driven decisions. So I work in inner city schools, and a lot of the issues we deal with are different than typical schools. So we make a lot of decisions around data, and we look at when children are successful and when they're not. Those skills can be applied to this kind of thing. We don't know in Kansas when our tax dollars or the incentives we're using are working or not. And I think we need to make data-driven decisions and set up policies and set up a structure so that we can track what's doing really well and what is bringing in great, high-paying jobs to our area. I'm going to give an example. My husband's lab is an international company, and they were attracted by the Bioscience Authority, which was dismantled by Brownback. They are getting ready this year to open a multi-million-dollar extension in Lenexa. And it is really, really sad to me that we don't have the ability to know if that was working in other places as well.
Okay, thank you. And Tom?
I think it's kind of a mix of the two answers. I think tax policy does play a role in it, but with the Brownback tax experiment, we found that that didn't drive new business development here. You could say if we were the only state that could go to zero income tax, yeah, that would probably work. But you've got 6, 7, 8 states that already do that. And most of those states have other economies that drive their industry, that drive their revenue base, so they can afford to do that. Kansas found out we don't have that. You have to have some level of income tax, able to even afford basic services in Kansas. Again, it is good schools are going to help bring things here, but that's not the only piece either. You can find good schools in a lot of different places. One of our best advantages that people don't realize is real estate. I lived in San Diego for 2 years, worked for a real estate company based out of there. The most valuable object out there is land. The least valuable object out here is land. Actually, Kansas City Metro has the most land per person in the United States. And so it's the ability to show the cost-effective savings that you can do here by bringing here, investing in here, how much you can build large infrastructure at a significantly lower cost, how you can afford, because homes are less expensive than other places, to have a higher quality of life and bring those jobs here. But another piece is we need to fund higher education. You have no larger economic engine for high-skilled labor jobs than your university system, which we've chronically underfunded as well. We've restored a lot of the funding cuts they've had, but we need to go farther. But that is one of the things that I've talked to businesses who said, yeah, we're interested. You don't have the universities to produce the jobs we need to hire. That's our biggest concern.
Thank you. And the last question is, what is the most important thing that distinguishes you from your opponent in this race? And Laura, you're first up.
Okay, well, I think it's, for me, perspective and life experience that's different. Our district has been represented for the last 8 years by a group that doesn't align with who I am. So I have talked to a lot of families this summer who are really struggling to make ends meet, to raise their children and pay for the costs that are encompassed with that. And I've lived that myself, and I understand that. I also have 2 children in the great Shawnee Mission Public Schools, and have seen how difficult it is to balance really great life with kids and the ability to navigate working full-time. That perspective is really needed in our State House. I think we have we've reduced ourselves to ideological islands, and we've gotten away from the perspective that everyday people are suffering when we go to those extremes. I'm a very independent, I'll give you my mother, you have my word, or I can give you my mother's phone number, who will attest to the fact that I'm never one to give in to peer pressure and go with a group just because. So I think of myself as a very independent thinker that is open to all ideas that are reasonable and would bring that to the State House in hopes of getting a more unified Kansas that can make progress.
Okay. Tom, same question.
Yeah, one of the things that distinguishes me is I'm born and raised here in this district. I represent my entire immediate family, as I've said before. And if you've ever thought it's easy to win an argument with one of your siblings, imagine how hard it is when they can threaten to run against you or vote against you. I've lost more arguments in the last 2 years against them than I ever have before. But I know this community. I represent so many of the teachers that I had growing up. My Boy Scout master, my Cub Scout master. This is my home and I know that well. I do think one of the differences is experience. I've spent 2 years up there building relationships, building knowledge, learning how to work the system. I've introduced 2 bills that were both turned into law with bipartisan support. I think that's a very valuable thing to have. Additionally, one that would distinguish me more from Laura is she made a comment last night I thought was interesting at a different forum saying people should vote for her because they need a Democrat up there. And I thought that was interesting because it's a partisan line saying you need to vote for a Democrat. I don't think anyone should vote for me because I'm a Republican. I think you should vote for me if you believe in what I represent and the job that I've done. We don't need partisan things going on up there. I don't vote as a Republican. I don't support a party. I support a district, and I represent a district that is made up of every party affiliation of wide different views, and my goal is to represent that district, never a party. I've been willing to stand up to my leadership every time when I thought what they were asking for was in the wrong situation for our district. That constitutional amendment that was brought forward to strip education funding, I voted against it. I was one of 3 Republicans on a committee to vote against it. And I got frozen out by our leadership at a time for that, for going against it. I voted against every single veto override of Sam Brownback. So I will always fight for this district, and I will never put a party first.
Thank you. And Michael?
Okay, I put individual freedom first above all consideration. For example, I support your right to keep and bear arms in no conditions or buts or exceptions. I suspect both of my opponents will probably be open to some exceptions to that, some buts. I consider progressive income tax as fractional slavery, and which punishes the most productive people, who earn the most. They get punished the most. And I want to completely legalize marijuana, not just for medical, but for every possible use. That will give us all sorts of benefits. As I said before, it's going to let us send 20% of our prisoners home and take care of the prison overcrowding in 1 month, or overnight probably. And let's see, what else? One other thing, just about tax abatements. You were objecting, you want the tax abatements to be published. I think tax abatements given to new people coming in disadvantages the existing businesses. If your taxes are so high that you have to give a newcomer an abatement to come in, then your taxes are too high on the existing businesses. Cut taxes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we go into the 2-minute closing statements, and Michael, you lead that off.
Well, okay, at last, that was almost my closing statement just there. I know that libertarian is a stranger to most of you. You've never heard of it. We do have a consistent policy of non-aggression. So that means on a national basis, we're certainly not into wars and dropping bombs on random people on the other side of the earth. And we're very firmly in favor of your freedom to possess arms, to use marijuana, to marry whoever you want, and anything you want to do that doesn't take something from somebody else is okay. And if you want freedom, I'm the guy you have to vote for. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Tom?
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Phil, for moderating this. Thank you to the Chambers for hosting this. I'm hoping to have the opportunity to go serve our community once again. It has been the greatest honor of my life, and I do not say that as some cliche, or I don't say it lightly. It truly has been to be able to represent this community. I promise to go up there and fight for transparency and accountability. I've held a town hall every single month with 2 of my colleagues, Senator Dinah Sykes and Representative Linda Gallagher, every month of the year, whether we're in session or not, so we can be accountable, so we can talk back to you. I've sent dozens of newsletters, posted up dozens of vote explanations, because that is our job. I look forward to hopefully having the opportunity to take the knowledge and relationships I've built and be an even more effective legislator and representative for this community. But I just want to continue to fight for us. I'm from here, I'm for here. That's my slogan, and that's the truth. This is where I grew up. This is where I'll raise my family someday. And I couldn't be more honored to be a part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you. And Laura?
So I will share with you all what I said last night that Mr. Cox was referring to. I said, if Chris Kobach becomes governor, I believe that we need a Democrat to represent our district, to stand up to really extreme policies that Kansas has already lived through and knows that we cannot afford to live through again. And if Laura Kelly becomes the governor, I believe we need a Democrat to represent our district who will help move Kansas forward. And I believe that I would be that candidate. I have a career that I love, and I would always be happy to return to. I have no need to start a new career and worry about moving up a ladder. Our current representative has said a number of times that he has had to do things because the truth is he's tied to a party who still has extreme leadership in Topeka and then don't have our best interests in mind. So to me, this is a year that I think I would love to be able to earn your vote, and I'd love to be able to speak with you afterwards if you have any questions. That we really have an opportunity this year to make a great difference. I want my children and your children to want to come back to Kansas. I want them to feel like it is a state that they love and to know that there is really no place like home.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our forum for House District 17. Let's give our candidates a round of applause. Thank you very much. And we'll take